Picture this. It's Sunday afternoon at Orange County International Raceway 1974. The staging lanes are packed with fire-breathing pro stock monsters, Camaros, Plymouth Dusters, AMC Javelins. Then a candy apple red Chevy Vega rolls up. The other racers actually laugh. A Vega in pro stock? That's like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Except this particular knife was made by Bill Grumpy Jenkins, and it was about to cut through the competition like they were standing still. Jenkins' Vega weighed 1,600 pounds. Let that sink in for a moment. A modern Honda Civic weighs 3,000 pounds. This was a full-bore pro-stock race car that weighed less than a vintage Volkswagen Beetle. While his competitors were bolting on bigger blowers and boring out their engines for more cubes, Jenkins had discovered something the entire racing world had missed. In drag racing, power is only half the equation. The other half? Weight. And Jenkins had just rewritten the math. This is the story of how an Arizona tuner took Chevrolet's worst car, a vehicle so poorly built that engines literally fell out during testing, and transformed it into the most dominant pro-stock platform of the 1970s. Not through brute force, but through engineering brilliance that made every other team look like they were racing in the Stone Age. To understand the genius of Jenkins's creation, we need to travel back to 1968. General Motors was hemorrhaging market share to imports. The Volkswagen Beetle was selling 400,000 units a year in America. Toyota was gaining ground. Detroit needed a small car, and they needed it fast. Enter John DeLorean, then head of Chevrolet division. DeLorean promised GM brass he could deliver an import fighter for under $2,000. The project, codenamed XP887, would become the Vega. From the beginning, it was a disaster. Engineers were given impossible deadlines. Cost accountants overruled safety concerns. The aluminum engine block was revolutionary, but untested. By the time the Vega launched in 1970, Chevrolet knew they had problems. The engine burned oil from day one. The aluminum block didn't have cylinder liners, relying instead on a silicon etching process that wore out after 50,000 miles. The car rusted so badly that owners joked you could hear it oxidizing in the driveway. Consumer Reports called it the worst car ever sold in America. By 1974, when Jenkins was building his race car, the Vega had become a punchline. But here's where it gets interesting. While the Vega failed as a street car, it had one characteristic that made it perfect for pro stock. The body shell was incredibly light. Chevrolet had used a unibody construction with thin-gauge steel to save weight and cost. The entire body in white weighed just 385 pounds. Compare that to a Camaro shell at 520 pounds or a Nova at 495 pounds. Jenkins wasn't just some backyard mechanic who got lucky. Born in 1930 in Pennsylvania, he'd been building race engines since the 1950s. By 1974, he had already won 8 NHRA national championships. His shop in Malvern, Pennsylvania, was considered the MIT of drag racing. Jenkins didn't just build fast cars, he understood the physics behind them. The pro stock class had specific rules. Minimum weight was determined by engine displacement, essentially 1 pound per cubic inch. Most teams were running 500 cubic inch engines, meaning a minimum weight of 2,500 pounds. But there was no maximum displacement, and more importantly, no rule about how you achieved that minimum weight. Everyone else was adding ballast to their heavy cars. Jenkins realized he could build something so light that he'd need hundreds of pounds of ballast, which he could position exactly where he wanted for perfect weight distribution. Jenkins started with a bare Vega shell, then cut it apart. Every piece of unnecessary metal was removed. The floor pans, firewall, inner fenders, all gone. In their place went a full chromoly tube chassis. Now, chromoly steel isn't light. It's actually denser than regular steel. But it's incredibly strong, allowing Jenkins to use much thinner tubing while maintaining the required chassis stiffness. Where a standard Pro stock chassis might use 1.75-inch diameter tubing with 0.1 to 20-inch wall thickness, Jenkins could use 1.625-inch tubing with 0.083-inch walls. That's a 30% weight reduction per foot of tubing. The chassis alone saved 200 pounds compared to his competitors. But Jenkins was just getting started. The body panels were next. The stock steel hood weighed 28 pounds. Jenkins's aluminum replacement, 7 pounds. The doors, which were required by rules to be functional, were hollowed out and skinned with a 32-inch aluminum sheet. Each door went from 45 pounds to 12 pounds. The deck lid, fenders, bumpers, all aluminum. Even the window glass was replaced with Lexan polycarbonate, saving another 40 pounds. The really clever part was the ballast system. Jenkins needed to add 900 pounds to meet minimum weight. But instead of just bolting lead blocks to the frame like everyone else, he created a modular ballast system. Lead plates could be moved forward or backward to adjust weight distribution for different track conditions. Need more bite off the line? Move weight to the rear, track getting loose, shift some forward. It was like having a different car for every pass. Under the hood was a 331 cubic inch small block Chevrolet. Weight only 331 inches? In a class where everyone was running 500 plus? This is where the math gets beautiful. Jenkins' engine made 500 horsepower, about 1.51 horsepower per cubic inch. The big block guys were making 550 horsepower from 500 inches, only 1.1 horsepower per cubic inch. But here's the kicker. Jenkins' complete car weighed 2,166 pounds with driver. A typical 500-inch Camaro? 2,150 pounds. Do the math. Jenkins had 500 horsepower pushing 2,166 pounds. That's 4.33 pounds per horsepower. His competitors had 550 horsepower pushing 2,250 pounds. That's 5.18 pounds per horsepower. In drag racing, power-to-weight ratio is everything. Jenkins had a 19% advantage before he even staged. The engine itself was a masterpiece of efficiency. The block was a production bow tie piece, designed for NASCAR but legal in Pro stock. The rotating assembly was all about reducing mass. The crankshaft was gun-drilled, hollow passages drilled through the main journals to remove weight. The connecting rods were aluminum instead of steel. The pistons were custom forgings that weighed 380 grams each, compared to 450 grams for standard Pro stock pistons. The cylinder heads were where Jenkins really showed his genius. While everyone else was chasing airflow numbers on flow benches, Jenkins focused on velocity. His intake ports were actually smaller than his competitors, but they generated higher airspeed. Higher velocity means better cylinder filling, especially at the RPM ranges where Pro stock engines operate. The intake valves were 2.08 inches, the exhausts 1.60 inches, modest by Pro stock standards but perfectly matched to the bore size and RPM range. The camshaft was a roller design with 0.680-inch lift and 268 degrees duration at 0.050-inch lift. Those numbers might not mean much to non-gearheads, but here's what matters. This was considered a small cam for Pro stock. Jenkins' competitors were running 0.750-inch lift or more. But Jenkins understood that bigger isn't always better. His cam was optimized for his specific combination: bore, stroke, compression ratio, header design, everything working in harmony. The compression ratio was 14.1. That's extreme even by race standards. Street engines run 9.1 or 10.1. NASCAR engines might hit 12.1. At 14.1, the air-fuel mixture is compressed so violently that it wants to explode before the spark plug fires. This is called detonation, and it destroys engines. Jenkins prevented this with precise chamber design and 115-octane racing fuel. Every surface in the combustion chamber was polished to a mirror finish to prevent hot spots. The induction system was a tunnel ram intake manifold with two Holley 660 CFM carburetors, Again, modest by pro stock standards, where 850 CFM carbs were common. But Jenkins had calculated exactly how much air his 331 inches could consume at 8,500 RPM. Any more carburation was just restriction. The tunnel ram design provided a straight shot from carburetor to intake valve, minimizing turbulence. The exhaust system was equally exotic. The headers were step-designed, starting at 1.75 inches at the port and stepping up to 2 inches, then 2.125 inches. Each step was precisely located based on exhaust pulse tuning. When an exhaust valve opens, it sends a pressure wave down the header. That wave reflects back from the collector. Jenkins timed these reflections to arrive back at the exhaust valve just as it was closing, helping to scavenge the cylinder. The transmission was a clutchless Liberty 5-speed. No clutch pedal, no synchronizers, just straight cut. Gears that could be slammed from one ratio to the next in milliseconds. First gear was 2.681, second was 1.81, third was 1.291, fourth was 1.1, and fifth was 0.91. Jenkins would use all 5 gears on a quarter-mile pass, shifting at exactly 8,500 RPM each time. The rear axle was a Dana 60 with 5.14.1 gears. That's an incredibly steep ratio. The drive shaft was spinning 5.14 times for every revolution of the rear wheels. This multiplication was necessary to keep the small engine in its power band. The bigger engines could run 430.1 or 456.1 gears because they had more torque. Jenkins needed the mechanical advantage. But here's where Jenkins' weight advantage really paid off: tire technology. Everyone in pro stock was limited to 10.5-inch wide slicks by rules. These tires could only handle so much power before they broke loose. The heavier cars needed their extra power just to accelerate their extra mass. Jenkins' lightweight Vega could use all 500 horsepower for acceleration, not just overcoming inertia. The first time Jenkins showed up with the Vega, his competitors laughed. Then they watched him run 940 seconds at 138 mph. For context, the national record was 9.35 seconds. Jenkins was immediately competitive with a car that weighed 400 pounds less than anything else in the class. The racing world was stunned. At the 1974 NHRA Spring Nationals in Columbus, Jenkins qualified number 1 with a 9.38. In eliminations, he faced Larry Lombardo's Camaro in the final. Lombardo's car made 50 more horsepower. It didn't matter. Jenkins left first and never looked back, winning with a 9.41 to Lombardo's 9.43. The crowd couldn't believe it. A Vega had just won a national event. The psychological effect was immediate. Every pro stock team started looking for ways to reduce weight. Fiberglass body parts became standard. Acid dipping to remove unnecessary metal became common. Teams started hollowing out brake rotors using titanium fasteners, even drilling holes in non-structural frame members. The weight wars had begun, and Jenkins had fired the first shot. But the real impact came from the manufacturers. Within months, Chevrolet was offering lightweight Vega bodies to racers. Pontiac countered with aluminum Firebird parts. Dodge developed a complete lightweight package for the Challenger. The factories were spending millions to catch up to what one guy in Arizona had figured out in his garage. By 1975, Vegas dominated pro stock. Bob Glidden won the championship in a Vega. Warren Johnson set the national record in a Vega. Wayne Gap, Lee Shepard, Frank Iaconio, all running Vegas. The car that couldn't keep its engine from burning oil on the street had become the most successful platform in professional drag racing. The NHRA tried to slow down the Vegas with weight penalties. For 1976, they added 100 pounds to all Vegas. Jenkins just removed more weight from other areas. They limited aluminum usage. Jenkins switched to titanium. They mandated stock frame rails. Jenkins made the rails structural members of his chromoly chassis, technically meeting the rule while still saving weight. The escalation continued through the decade. By 1978, Jenkins' latest Vega weighed just 1,480 pounds before ballast. He was now using carbon fiber body panels, which weren't even commercially available yet. Jenkins was having them custom-made at aerospace suppliers. The hood alone cost $5,000 in 1978 dollars. That's $22,000 today for one body panel. The engine had evolved too, still 331 cubic inches, but now making 650 horsepower, nearly 2 horsepower per cubic inch. The compression ratio had climbed to 15.1. The camshaft had grown to 7 to 20-inch lift. The RPM limit had pushed to 9,200. The car was running 8.90 seconds at 152 dpm. For a naturally aspirated door car, those were unthinkable numbers. But here's the thing about arms races. They eventually destroy what made the sport appealing. By 1979, a competitive pro-stock Vega cost $150,000 to build. That's $600,000 in today's money. Independent racers couldn't afford to compete. The class was becoming a factory showcase, exactly what it was designed not to be. The NHRA responded with the most dramatic rule change in pro-stock history. For 1982, they mandated a minimum weight of 2,350 pounds, regardless of engine size, and implemented a 500 cubic inch maximum displacement. The weight-to-displacement formula was dead. So was the Vega's advantage. Overnight, Jenkins's creation became obsolete. The lightweight era was over. But the impact of Jenkins's innovation went far beyond pro-stock. The aerospace materials he pioneered, chromoly, titanium, carbon fiber, became standard in all forms of motorsport. The modular ballast system is used in everything from NASCAR to Formula One. The emphasis on power-to-weight ratio over absolute power changed how engineers approached performance. In the automotive industry, the lessons were even more profound. The 1980s saw a shift from big block muscle to lightweight performance. The Buick Grand National made 245 horsepower, but weighed 3,400 pounds. It was faster than Corvettes, making 300 horsepower, but weighing 3,800 pounds. The Ford Mustang SVO used a turbocharged four-cylinder and aluminum suspension components to achieve performance through efficiency, not displacement. Today, every performance car follows Jenkins' philosophy. The Mazda Miata dominates amateur racing not through power, but through lightweight construction. The Lotus Elise weighs 2,000 pounds and embarrasses supercars on track days. The latest Corvette Z06 uses carbon fiber wheels, titanium exhaust, and aluminum frame rails, all technologies Jenkins pioneered in that candy apple red Vega. The irony is delicious. Chevrolet spent hundreds of millions developing the Vega as an economy car, and it failed catastrophically. One racer in Arizona spent maybe $50,000 building a race car that changed motorsports forever. The Vega finally found success, just not in any way General Motors anticipated. Jenkins himself raced until 2012, when he was 82 years old. He passed away in 2012, still holding numerous NHRA records. His shop in Pennsylvania is now a museum. The original 1,600-pound Vega is the centerpiece, still wearing its candy apple red paint, still looking like it could line up and embarrass modern pro-stockers. But Jenkins's real legacy isn't in museums or record books. It's in the fundamental understanding that in racing, in engineering, in problem-solving, the obvious solution isn't always the right solution. While everyone else was adding power, Jenkins subtracted weight. While everyone else followed conventional wisdom, Jenkins questioned it. The next time you see a modern performance car bragging about its carbon fiber roof or aluminum suspension, remember where it started. Not in some Formula One laboratory or aerospace facility, but in a small shop in Arizona where one man looked at everyone adding horsepower and thought, what if we tried the opposite? That's the beauty of engineering. Sometimes the breakthrough isn't in doing what everyone else does better. Sometimes it's in doing what no one else has thought to try. Jenkins didn't outsmart Chevrolet by building a better Vega than they could. He outsmarted them by seeing potential where they saw failure. He took their worst creation and made it their greatest racing success. The Vega proved that in racing, brains beat brawn, physics beats horsepower, and sometimes, just sometimes, the laughingstock becomes the legend. Every lightweight performance car today, from Ariel Adams to McLaren Sennas, owes a debt to that candy apple red Vega that showed up at Orange County in 1974 and rewrote the rules of how to go fast. What's the lightest car you've ever driven? Did it change your perspective on performance? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoyed this deep dive into one of racing's greatest innovations, make sure to subscribe. We're just getting started exploring the engineering marvels that changed motorsports forever. Until next time, remember, sometimes the best way to add performance is to subtract everything else.